Welcome everyone, my name is Spades and this is Goblin-Inc. In the latest seasons, Druid has consistently been among the least played, if not the least played class, and usually the weakest class in Diablo 4. Originally, Druid released with two major bugs that carried the class from pre-season to the end of Season 2, namely the Bulwark bug and the Blurred Beast bug. Without these bugs, the class historically lacked damage, especially damage multipliers, with the sole exception of pre-nerf Rampaging Werbeast that used to not be 200% additive damage like now, but it used to be 1000% multiplicative damage, which has hidden most of the Druid weak spots in the first few seasons. The developers have largely then focused most of the patch notes on part of the Druid class that they felt were underused. Most of the patch notes for the class have been repeated buffs to Lacerate, Boulder, Rabies, and companions. In doing so, though, they failed to address the core issues of the class and oftentimes made things much worse for the player base. In their effort to include companions in the Druid meta, they buffed the infamous Shepard aspect. The aspect has now become the main engine of almost Druid builds. What is an engine and what I mean by engine? Well, one of the most popular and requested engines in the Druid community is the combination of Grizzly Rage and aspect of the Rampaging Werbeast. Oftentimes, it was paired with the Direwolf aspect and Tempest Roar. An engine is the main driving force of a build, it's your main source of damage oftentimes, and when done correctly, it also solves a lot of the issues for builds, which leads to the player feel accomplished and powerful. That's why pressing Grizzly Rage has always felt so good. Instead, the Shepard aspect is a much less elegant engine. Its only purpose is to increase the player's damage at the expense of your fun and quality of life. Meanwhile, the Grizzly Rage engine fixes the player resource issues and increases the mobility of the player. In the case of the Stormwolf version, you were running with Tempest Roar and Direwolf aspect to reduce the cost of your skills, and the movement speed gained was excellent. The Shepard engine instead not only fails to provide anything other than damage, but also forces the player to cannibalize most of the fun in playing the game by adding 3 skills on your bar that do absolutely nothing, and you never really use any of them other than on some rare occasions. Because of this, the class has suffered for immense quality of life issues. Resource management was never easy for Druid, but it's now really a nightmare. The Shepard aspect being the only big multiplier for Druid, it was only affecting core skills, and that had forced many non-core builds out of the meta. In seeing this, in order to address this issue that a lot of builds were getting pushed out of the meta, they did what I consider a mistake. They expanded the Shepard aspect to also cover rough skills, meaning that even rough skills builds now have to use Shepard aspect. Blizzard, focusing mostly on buffing companions, Rabies, Lacerate, and Boulder, has been largely unsuccessful, with moderate success in some small area which we'll discuss soon. Rabies and Boulder, in my opinion, represents their biggest failures when it comes to Druid. Starting with Rabies, the skill has received many buffs, too many to count. It has received a new aspect, on top of several tooltips buffs and passive buffs, and even received big buffs in terms of glyphs upgrades. Tracker and Bane have both been buffed. Season 4 has then introduced a very large tempering for Rabies, increasing its damage and also allowing the skill to be on an extremely low cooldown, with tempering on the rings and amulets, which will virtually reduce the cooldown of your skill to almost 0. Last one. No! My max 185! Rabies double GA bricked! No! It is, in my opinion, that continuously buffing a skill 15 or 20 times without obtaining a result is a waste of development resources and also causes great frustration in the players and the community. See, they expect the build to be viable. Sometimes they will try the build by themselves, realize it's bad and quit the game, and it's just very disappointing for them. I would like to raise awareness that maybe an approach like this, where, as you can see, I've created a fairly optimized version of the build. I have an Uber, myself plus saved Mastercraft, fully tempered gear with GA, and then I go and test the damage of the build. See, even after 1 year of continuous buff to Rabies, the build still fails to clear a Nightmare Dungeon 100 with any type of like decent speed or fun. This type of damage in a Nightmare 100 means that the build is off by a couple of 100 times damage, guys. 100 times damage. To put it in perspective, if it keeps getting buffs every patch, for the build to be viable, it will take Blizzard the same amount of time that George R.R. Martin needs to write not 1 but 10 Winds of Winter. Boulder, just like Rabies and Lacerate, keeps getting most of the attention in patch notes, not just one patch, but almost every patch since the start of the game. As a result, none of the problems Druid has been getting addressed. This has been to a lesser extent than with Rabies, but still Boulder has remained mostly inefficient. Let's talk about the Dolmen Stone. It's the Boulder unique item released in Season 2. It gives plus ranks to rough skills. This unique, unfortunately, is anti-synergetic with the Metamorphic Stone aspect, which is Druid's only Boulder aspect. This aspect turns Boulder into a core skill, making the build not benefit from the ranks to rough skills. Everything about this build is clunky, a chore, and frankly a little bit feels like it has not been playtested. See, the pushback, you keep pushing back all your enemies away. This is, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most people that has played the class, not fun. And it's a continuous complaint from the Druid community. Not only for Boulder, but also for other builds that are really not being played anymore. For example, Trample Slide. Another problem with Boulder is what I call the Eye of the Storm. Boulders do not hit targets too close to you. It's really annoying. Is this because it's the Eye of the Storm and you're not meant to hit things close to you, like in the Eye of the Storm? I don't know. Really not fun, in my opinion, to juggling enemies getting sent to Narnia and then those close to you do not take damage. Really not fun. Wallers and suppressors, you literally cannot play your build if you have them, especially Wallers. Your boulders evaporate with no counterplay. Hurricane, you need to constantly monitor the cooldown of this skill. If you forget to press the skill, all the boulders fly away. It's clunky. The build is clunky. Casting boulders feels horrible. You want to be a hurricane that, with rocks smoothly moving around. Instead, you can't move because casting boulders make you stutter, and you need to continuously cast boulders because they do not last a long time. The resource management, I believe to be a fairly decent theory crafter, and I cannot find a way to solve this problem elegantly for the average player. You need everything well rolled, often Ubers, often plus 12, T-balls, and still it feels like a chore. Now, moving on to Lacerate. Lacerate buffs have also been dominating the Druid patch notes. Largely, they have been inconsequential, but to their credit, in the last patch, they've realized that buffing Lacerate damage was not the route to go, and they've shifted their focus on Lacerate, Lacerate being more of a support skill and increasing your damage. Still, having spent such a large portion of Druid changes on increasing Lacerate damage with nothing to show for, I believe it to be a failure. Turning Lacerate into a support skill could have been done in the first pre-season patch, and Druid could have been in a better spot right now. Lacerate, without any buff to its damage, will still be doing 0 damage as it is doing now. Because remember, 0 times 0 is still 0, and it doesn't matter how many patches you throw at it, you cannot multiply it. But if Blizzard made a mistake in focusing on their skills, on those skills, what are instead the major issues that the Druid player base complains about? In my experience interacting with the average guy and try to provide them with fun builds to play, some of the problems and issues that they bring up to me are, well, we already talked about the low damage and the Shepard aspect being anti-fun, but another one is Envenom. Envenom being one of them. Used in 90% of all Druid builds, it's a powerful passive. And not having this passive on your amulet leaves players frustrated. Even if you want to trade, the supply and demand for this amulet means that the cost is prohibitive. Buffing more build specific passives like Defiance and Crushing Earth would allow for more amulets to be viable for druids, and maybe they can play those builds instead and also fix some of the damage issue the class has, 2 birds with 1 stone. Tempest Roar, another huge issue in the community. This item is probably misunderstood by the developers. They've called this item powerful and gave that as a reason for its rarity in the past. The Druid players though, they feel differently about the item. The item is honestly underwhelming and incredibly boring. It lacks in interesting stats, and the only reason we play this item is that without it, the build would simply stop to function. We literally feel like we're losing a slot of gear when running this garbage. One of the most common situations I face daily interacting with players that finally are able to get their first Uber, and they're really happy, really excited about their first Uber, their Harley Quinn crest, but I have to tell them that it's simply not going to happen, as their build would stop to function and exist if they remove the Tempest Roar, leaving many of them frustrated that they cannot use their fun helms like Godslayer or Shaker. Which brings us to the next major issue. Druid, more than any other class, requires to run a specific unique to enable the build to exist, or specific uniques. An example of these are all the Tempest Roar builds we mentioned, but also the Stormclaw build, which is maybe one of the most casual friendly and popular build for Druid, using the great stuff of the Crone. Unfortunately, temperings are so powerful that unique weapons and Stormclaw then are not gonna be viable for now, till they get buffed. Being reliant on uniques is really bad when having low item slots like Druid has, but it gets even worse when considering the Druid design that relies heavily on what is effectively combos. Oftentimes you have to run combinations of aspects like Symbiotic and Nature's Savagery to make use of keystones like Nature's Fury. This eats up even more of our limited item slots. The uniques being a problem for Druid does not stop at how they eat away at our limited item slots. Oftentimes builds need to rely on them for resource management as well. The legendary node, the Last for Carnage, is a 2-for-1 when it comes to annoying players. Not only you have to have Tempest Roar to even use this legendary node, but you also have to get very min-maxed and expensive gear that have enough crit chance and not run, otherwise you're gonna be running out of water like a dog in the streets during a hot summer day. And while the situation is bleak, all of those can really simply be fixed with a few changes, even without reworking the class. Tweaking some numbers on talents and aspects that already exist would fix 99% of this problem. The main issue is that changes for Druid require a less artistic approach that the dev have preferred. Vibing changes is not gonna figure out what's missing for Druid. A more mathematical and practical approach, crunching numbers, would be my next choice for Druid patch, and then when most of the issues are fixed, the developers can go back to try and make more design decisions and funny, crazy things. That would be my opinion on the matter on why Druid has sucked. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video, and I will see you all on stream or my next video. Have a good day.
I would like you to crunch those numbers again.
It's programmed. There's no such thing
Just crunch them. Just crunch them, please.
Crunch.
Did it help?